You're throwing it all away, Sam, Hank hissed, a farmer battling drought and debt, blind to the storm one hire would unleash. Midday, he gave Drift, a haunted veteran, a lifeline among parched trees, sealing an unspoken pact. Days later, black SUVs descended, their dark intent shattering the orchard's fragile peace. Hello everyone. Welcome to Narrative Whispers. Today I'm going to tell you another heartwarming story, so let's dive into it. Sam Harrow wiped the sweat from his brow with a weathered handkerchief, squinting at the parched earth beneath his boots. 3 months without substantial rain had left the soil cracked and dusty. The Harrow family orchard, once vibrant and lush, now stood as a silent testament to nature's indifference, and the changing climate that threatened everything he'd worked for. Sam ran his calloused fingers through his graying hair, and sighed deeply. The bank notice in his back pocket felt heavier than it should. 90 days to settle his debts or face foreclosure. 3 generations of Harrows had tended this land, poured their sweat and dreams into these trees. His father would have known what to do, but Sam? He just felt the weight of failure pressing down on him with each passing day, crushing his spirit like the drought was crushing his beloved trees. Dad? His daughter Lily appeared beside him, her freckled face etched with concern. At 16, she was already shouldering burdens no teenager should bear. Mrs. Winters called, said she can't buy our apples this season after all. Sam nodded silently, his jaw tightening. Another customer gone. The orchard's reputation was withering faster than the trees themselves. We're going to be okay though, right? Lily's voice wavered slightly, betraying the confidence she tried to project. Course we are, sweetheart, Sam replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wrapped an arm around her narrow shoulders, remembering when she was small enough to ride on his back through the orchard rows. Harrows don't quit. We just need some help for the harvest. He gestured toward the trees that still bore fruit, albeit smaller and fewer than in years past. I'm heading into town to post a help wanted notice. Maybe we'll find someone willing to work for future payment. The small town of Riverbrick hadn't changed much in Sam's 52 years. The same brick buildings lined Main Street, their facades weathered but dignified. The same faces nodded greeting as he passed, though he noted the pity in their eyes now. Everyone knew the Harrow orchard was failing. Everyone had an opinion about it too, whispered behind hands in the diner or openly discussed at the weekly farmers' market where Sam's booth had been conspicuously empty this season. The bell above Hank's general store door jingled as Sam entered, the familiar scent of coffee and leather goods greeting him. Hank himself stood behind the counter, his enormous white mustache quivering as he smiled in greeting. Sam Harrow! Haven't seen you in ages. What brings you to town? His booming voice carried through the store, drawing the attention of the few other customers browsing the shelves. Need to post a help wanted notice, Sam replied, pulling a folded paper from his shirt pocket. Looking for harvest help, someone strong who works cheap. He attempted a chuckle, but it came out hollow. Hank's smile faltered as he took the paper, his eyes scanning the desperate terms Sam was offering: room, board, and a share of profits if the harvest yielded any. Times that tough out at the orchard? Hank asked softly, his voice dropping so others wouldn't hear. Sam merely nodded, his pride preventing him from elaborating. Hank clapped his shoulder sympathetically. I'll put it on the board, but, he hesitated, leaning closer, you might want to be careful who you bring home these days. Heard there's been some drifters coming through. Strange sorts. Sam was pinning his notice to the community board when a shadow fell across the paper. He turned to find a tall man standing silently behind him. The stranger's posture was military straight, but his eyes held a wariness that spoke of hard living. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, partially hidden by several days' stubble. Despite the summer heat, he wore a long-sleeved flannel shirt buttoned to the wrists. You hiring? The man's voice was quiet but clear, with an accent Sam couldn't quite place. He gestured to the notice Sam had just posted. I need work. I'm stronger than I look. There was something in the way he stood, alert yet trying not to draw attention, that made Sam hesitate. Got experience with orchards? Sam asked, studying the man's face. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair cropped short, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The stranger shook his head. Military background, quick learner, don't need much pay, just... He glanced around the store, noticing how conversations had hushed since his arrival. Just somewhere quiet to stay for a while. Sam felt Hank's warning echoing in his head, but something about this man's direct gaze made him reconsider. The orchard needed help. Help Sam couldn't afford to pay for properly, And this stranger needed something Sam had plenty of: isolation and quietude. "What's your name?" Sam asked finally. "People call me Drift," the man replied, extending a hand. "Elias Donovan officially, but I haven't used that in a while." His grip was firm, his palm calloused in places that told Sam he knew physical labor. "When can I start?" The drive back to the orchard was mostly silent, with Drift staring out the window of Sam's ancient pickup truck, occasionally nodding at something Sam pointed out. The man had exactly one duffel bag to his name, which now sat between them on the worn bench seat. Sam couldn't help but notice how Drift checked the rearview mirror regularly, his eyes scanning the road behind them with practiced vigilance. "Not running from the law, are you?" Sam asked eventually, attempting to make it sound light-hearted. Drift's expression didn't change, but Sam noticed his shoulders tense slightly. "Nothing like that," Drift replied, his eyes still on the mirror. "Just cautious by nature." He turned to look at Sam directly. "I won't bring trouble to your door, Mr. Harrow. You have my word on that." Sam nodded, wanting to believe him. The truth was, he needed help too desperately to turn it away, even if it came with complications. "Call me Sam," he said, turning the truck onto the long dirt driveway that led to the orchard. "Everyone does." Lily was waiting on the porch when they pulled up, her arms crossed defensively as she watched Drift climb out of the passenger side. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously, taking in his rigid posture and the scar on his face. "Who's this?" she called to her father, making no move to come closer. "Our new harvest help," Sam replied, grabbing Drift's duffel before the man could reach for it himself. "Elias Donovan, this is my daughter Lily. She helps run things around here." He saw something soften in Drift's expression as he nodded politely to Lily, a glimpse of gentleness that hadn't been there before. "Ma'am," Drift said simply, standing awkwardly by the truck until Sam motioned him toward the house. Lily's skeptical gaze followed them inside, where Sam showed Drift to the small room off the kitchen that had once belonged to his now-departed father. "It's not much," Sam apologized, setting the duffel on the narrow bed. "But it's yours while you're here. Bathrooms down the hall. We eat breakfast at 6, dinner at 7. Rest of the time, it's catch as catch can." He hesitated, then added, "My wife Emily died 5 years back. It's just me and Lily now. She's protective." Drift nodded, his eyes taking in the sparse furnishings of the room: the bed, a dresser, a small desk beneath the window overlooking the eastern edge of the orchard. "It's more than I expected," he said quietly. "Thank you." The first few days established a tentative routine. Drift was up before dawn each morning, already working by the time Sam emerged from the house. Despite his lack of experience with orchard work, he learned quickly, his movements becoming more efficient with each passing day. He spoke little but observed everything, from the irrigation system Sam had cobbled together to the specific way certain apple varieties needed to be harvested. On the fourth evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Lily finally broached the subject they'd all been avoiding. "So where were you stationed?" she asked Drift directly, her tone challenging. Sam shot her a warning look, but Drift didn't seem offended. "All over," he replied, his eyes on the setting sun painting the horizon in shades of crimson and gold. "Afghanistan mostly. Some places I'm not supposed to talk about." He glanced at Lily, offering a small smile. "But that was a long time ago. What did you do after?" she pressed, ignoring her father's sigh. "Before you came here?" Drift's expression closed slightly. "Private security work, the kind that pays well but costs too much." He stood up, stretching subtly. "If you'll excuse me, I want to check on that eastern irrigation line before it gets dark. Thought I saw a leak earlier." Before either Harrow could respond, he was gone, walking with purposeful strides toward the orchard. "You shouldn't pry," Sam admonished gently once Drift was out of earshot. Lily's freckled face flushed with indignation. "Don't you think we should know who we're living with?" she countered. "He's hiding something, Dad, I can tell." She stared after Drift's retreating figure, her expression troubled. "I just don't want you to get hurt." Sam reached over to squeeze her hand. "I appreciate the concern, sweetheart, but sometimes people just need a fresh start. God knows we could use some help around here." He looked out at the orchard, where Drift's silhouette was barely visible among the trees. "Besides, he's the hardest worker I've seen in years." The following week brought the first real progress the orchard had seen in months. Drift had identified several inefficiencies in Sam's irrigation system and made improvements that conserved their limited water supply while better targeting the trees' needs. The apples, though fewer than in previous years, were beginning to look healthier. For the first time in a long while, Sam felt a flicker of hope. It was nearly midnight when Sam was awakened by a sound he couldn't immediately identify. He lay still, listening. There it was again, a soft mechanical click, followed by rapid movement. Grabbing the old baseball bat he kept beside his bed, Sam crept down the hallway toward Drift's room, where a thin line of light showed beneath the door. Sam hesitated, then knocked softly. The light immediately went out. "Drift? Everything okay in there?" Sam called, his hand tightening on the bat. No response. "I'm coming in, all right?" He turned the knob slowly, pushing the door open. Drift stood by the window, his posture rigid, one hand behind his back. The room was now dark except for the moonlight streaming in, illuminating the man's tense features. "Sorry if I woke you," Drift said, his voice controlled. "Had a nightmare. Old habits." Sam lowered the bat, noticing how Drift's eyes tracked the movement. "Happens to the best of us," he said carefully. "Thought I heard something, that's all." He glanced around the room, noting that Drift's duffel was open on the bed, its contents partially visible. Something metallic gleamed in the moonlight. "Is that a gun?" Sam asked, unable to keep the alarm from his voice. Drift didn't move, but something in his expression shifted. "Yes," he admitted after a long pause. "I have a license. It's from my security days. I should have told you." He slowly brought his hand from behind his back, showing it empty. "I understand if you want me to leave." Sam considered the situation. His daughter was sleeping just down the hall. He had invited a stranger, an armed stranger, into their home. Yet something in Drift's demeanor didn't feel threatening. Cautious, yes. Defensive, certainly. But not dangerous. At least not to them. "Keep it secured," Sam said finally. "And maybe tell me these things up front next time." He lowered the bat completely. "We all have our reasons for caution, I suppose." Relief washed over Drift's features, though his posture remained tense. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I promise you won't regret it." 3 days later, Sam was beginning to think he might have spoken too soon. He was working in the western section of the orchard, Drift half a dozen rows away, when he noticed a black SUV with tinted windows turning onto their long driveway. Something about the vehicle, its careful approach, its government-sleek appearance, sent a chill down his spine. "Drift," he called, trying to keep his voice casual. "We've got visitors." Drift's head snapped up, his body going completely still as he spotted the approaching vehicle. In an instant, his entire demeanor changed. The quiet, efficient worker vanished, replaced by someone else entirely. Someone alert, calculating, dangerous. "Get to the house," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now, what's going on?" Sam demanded, even as he began moving toward the farmhouse where Lily was inside working on her online classes. "Who are they?" "People I used to work for," Drift replied grimly, keeping pace with Sam as they hurried across the field. "They're not here for a friendly chat." They reached the back porch just as the SUV pulled to a stop in the front yard. "Is there a gun in the house?" "My father's shotgun," Sam admitted, his heart pounding. "In the closet upstairs." "Drift, what the hell have you brought to my door?" Drift's eyes met his, filled with genuine regret. "The truth," he said simply, "and they'll kill to keep it buried." He paused at the door. "I'll leave. Draw them away from your family." "Like hell you will," Sam growled, surprising himself with his vehemence. "This is my property. Nobody threatens my family or my guests." He pushed past Drift into the house, calling for Lily. She appeared at the top of the stairs, confusion turning to fear as she saw their expressions. "Dad? What's happening?" she asked, her voice small. "Get my shotgun and stay upstairs," Sam ordered, his tone brooking no argument. "And call Sheriff Bennett. Tell him we have armed trespassers." As Lily hurried to obey, Sam turned back to Drift, who was peering through the window beside the front door. "Now talk fast. What are we dealing with?" Drift's explanation came in clipped, efficient sentences as they watched 3 men exit the SUV, all wearing identical dark suits despite the summer heat. Private military contractors, mercenaries, essentially. They operate in war zones, officially supporting you. Interests, unofficially, he grimaced. They're hired killers, sometimes working for the highest bidder regardless of allegiance. I gathered evidence of illegal operations, civilian casualties covered up, money laundering, blackmail of officials. Was planning to turn it over to a journalist I trust, and they found you," Sam concluded, watching as the men spread out, one approaching the front door while the others circled toward the sides of the house. "How? I got careless," Drift admitted, a flash of self-recrimination crossing his features. Used an old contact to get fake papers when I crossed through Tennessee. Must have been compromised. He glanced at Sam, his expression grim. I'm sorry for bringing this to your door, but I won't let them hurt your family. The knock at the front door was almost civilized. Sam took a deep breath, then nodded to Drift, who positioned himself behind the door, out of sight. Remember, Drift whispered, they'll act official, claim legal authority they don't have, don't believe a word. Sam opened the door halfway, blocking the entrance with his body. The man before him looked more like an accountant than a mercenary, clean-cut, with a bland smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. Mr. Harrow? The man asked pleasantly. I'm Agent Phillips with the Department of Defense. We're looking for this man. He held up a tablet showing a military photo of Drift, younger, clean-shaven, wearing a uniform with the name Donovan visible. Haven't seen him, Sam replied evenly, grateful for his poker face honed over years of haggling with produce buyers. What's he wanted for? Theft of classified information, Phillips replied smoothly. He's considered armed and extremely dangerous. Mind if we take a look around? He was spotted in this area recently. Sam felt sweat beading on his forehead. Got a warrant? He asked, fighting to keep his voice casual. Phillips's smile tightened slightly. National security exception, he said, his tone hardening. We don't need one. Step aside, Mr. Harrow. We don't want to make this difficult for you. That's funny, came a new voice, causing them all to turn. Sheriff Bennett stood by his patrol car, hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Because around here, we still believe in the Constitution. I'm going to need to see some identification, sir. Phillips's expression flickered with annoyance before smoothing back into professional blandness. Of course, Sheriff. My credentials are in the vehicle. If you'll just come with me. He gestured toward the SUV, where his companions had frozen in their approach to the house. What happened next unfolded with startling speed. As Phillips reached into his jacket, Drift burst through the door, tackling him to the ground. Gun! Drift shouted, wrestling with the man as a pistol clattered onto the porch. The other two men immediately drew weapons, but Sheriff Bennett was faster, his own gun already aimed. Drop them! Bennett bellowed, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years in law enforcement. Now! For a moment, the tableau held, Drift pinning Phillips to the ground, the other men frozen with weapons half raised, the sheriff's steady aim promising consequences. Then, to Sam's immense relief, the men slowly lowered their guns, placing them on the ground with obvious reluctance. Smart choice, Bennett said, approaching cautiously to kick the weapons away. Now someone want to tell me what the hell is going on here? The next few hours passed in a blur of explanations and evidence. Drift produced a small hard drive from his duffel bag, containing documents and video recordings that painted a damning picture of corruption and criminality reaching into the highest levels of government contracting. Sheriff Bennett, initially skeptical, grew increasingly grave as he reviewed the materials. This is way above my pay grade, he admitted, rubbing his weathered face. But I know who to call. Got a buddy in the FBI who specializes in public corruption cases. Straight arrow, trustworthy. He fixed Drift with a hard stare. You realize what you're doing? These people have long arms and longer memories. Drift nodded, his expression resolute. I've been carrying this burden too long, he said quietly. Can't run forever. Better to face it head on. Sam, who had been listening silently, finally spoke up. Whatever happens, you've got people in your corner now. He glanced at Lily, who had come downstairs once the situation was secured. To his surprise, she nodded firmly in agreement. Nobody should face something like this alone, she said, her earlier suspicion replaced with a fierce determination that reminded Sam so much of her mother and made his heart ache. The following weeks brought changes no one could have anticipated. Drift's evidence, properly channeled through Bennett's FBI contact, triggered a series of investigations that reached into multiple federal agencies. Congressional hearings were scheduled, indictments were prepared, and the shadowy firm that had hunted Drift found itself suddenly exposed to unwelcome scrutiny. For Drift himself, the path forward remained uncertain. Federal protection was arranged, with the understanding that his testimony would be crucial in the coming months. Yet each evening, he returned to the Harrow orchard, working alongside Sam until sunset, as if trying to build something stable in the midst of chaos. You know you don't have to keep working, Sam told him one evening as they repaired fencing along the property line. You've got bigger concerns now. Drift paused, hammer in hand, considering his words carefully. This work grounds me, he said finally, reminds me why I made the choices I did. He looked out over the orchard, where the trees were showing subtle signs of recovery thanks to their combined efforts. For so long, I was part of destroying things. Now I'm helping something grow. The story of Harrow Orchard and the whistleblower it harbored spread through Riverbrook like wildfire. To Sam's astonishment, instead of fear or condemnation, the town responded with a surge of support. Customers who had abandoned them returned. Neighboring farmers offered equipment and advice for drought management. A local tech company even approached them about installing experimental sustainable irrigation systems at a fraction of the usual cost. I don't understand it, Sam confessed to Sheriff Bennett one afternoon as they watched volunteers from town helping to install the new systems. A month ago, we were barely hanging on. Now this. Bennett chuckled, clapping Sam on the shoulder. People respect courage, Sam. You stood by your principles when it would have been easier to look the other way. That means something in a small town. He nodded toward Drift, who was patiently explaining the irrigation controls to Lily. And that young man of yours brought more than trouble. He brought a chance for folks to be part of something bigger than themselves. 6 months later, as the first snow dusted the rejuvenated orchard, Sam found Drift standing at the edge of the property, staring out at the road that disappeared over the horizon. The congressional hearings had concluded, the principal villains had faced justice, and Drift's protective detail had finally been withdrawn. He was free to go wherever he chose. Beautiful view, Sam commented, coming to stand beside him. Drift nodded, his breath fogging in the cold air. You know, Sam continued carefully, we're expanding the north section in spring, going to need a partner who knows their way around an orchard. Drift turned to him, surprise evident in his expression. A partner? Sam nodded, suddenly self-conscious. Place is too big for just me and Lily now. Thought maybe you'd consider. He trailed off, unsure how to continue. Staying. Drift finished for him, his voice quiet. He looked back at the farm, at the house with smoke curling from the chimney, at the barn they'd repaired together, at the orchard rows stretching into the distance. For the first time since Sam had known him, Drift's shoulders lost their vigilant tension. I'd like that, he said simply. I'd like that very much. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, where Lily waited with hot cider and plans for the spring planting, Sam reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. A desperate farmer and a haunted soldier, each bearing their own burdens, had somehow found in each other exactly what they needed, not just help or shelter, but redemption. A second chance. The Harrow Orchard, once withering, now stood as a testament to what could grow when courage and principle took root. And as the snow continued to fall, blanketing the land in pristine white, Sam knew with certainty that when spring came, they would be ready. Thank you for listening to this story. If you like it, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story of Narrative Whispers.